Hi, and welcome to today's current news. Today is Friday, April 19th, 2024. 42 Balloons. New musical follows man who flew over LA in a garden chair. In 1982, a truck driver made headlines when he tied 42 helium balloons to a garden chair and flew over part of Los Angeles. A new stage musical reclaims him as a hero, although questions remain over his story's tragic ending. In the aftermath of his unconventional voyage, Larry Walters assured the American public he wasn't actually a crackpot who had risked life and limb with a harebrained scheme that was dreamed up on a whim. No, taking flight had been a lifelong ambition, he told interviewers afterwards. But he had been rejected by the U.S. Air Force because of bad eyesight, so carried out years of careful research to make his dream come true in his own peculiarly homespun way. When he came back down to earth, somehow unscathed, after floating in a chair across the approach to LAX airport and landing in power lines, Walter's escapade caused a minor sensation. In an interview with David Letterman's TV show, he tried to explain how serious his plan had been, but his references to his craft and ground crew failed to quell the laughter from the audience. The craft was an ordinary piece of garden furniture, and the ground crew were a few friends and his fiancée in her small backyard. When people were laughing at him, he said, "I knew what I was doing," says Jack Godfrey, who was written the musical about the man named Lawn Chair Larry. He says multiple times in the interview, which is something that really sticks with me and is in the show, "I knew what I was doing." Even though he does acknowledge the absurdity of some of the things, I think he's saying it might have some ridiculous, but if you really look at every step of the plan, everything was organized and carefully arranged, and it wasn't just a careless thing. He was a pilot, not just a guy sitting in a chair. He was actually a pilot in his head. Indeed, Walters did have everything planned out. He had calculated how many balloons he needed, attached 13 plastic jugs of water to his chair as ballast, and took an air pistol to burst the balloons to control his descent. However, not everything went according to plan. Aircraft sightings. Larry ended up soaring much higher than expected, losing a pair of glasses overboard as he shot up to 16,000 feet. 2 commercial aircraft reported sightings to air traffic control. After shooting out 7 balloons, he accidentally dropped the gun before the remaining balloons started to deflate, and he landed unharmed after about 45 minutes. Larry's initial fame may not have lasted much longer than his flight, but his exploits have continued to hold on an unlikely fascination for 4 decades. He has inspired numerous cluster ballooning copycats and a 2003 film starring Rhys Ifans, while the balloon idea was taken to new heights in Pixar's 2009 movie Up. He has now made it across the Atlantic thanks to the musical 42 Balloons, which opens at the Lowry Theatre in Salford, Greater Manchester on Thursday. There's something about the story that I really connected with, its writer and composer says. Seeing someone achieve an apparently far-fetched life goal is inspiring, Godfrey explains. The 31-year-old wrote the show while working part-time as a teacher and harboring his own sedate ambition. I had just moved to London, and I had this big dream of becoming a writer, and I had people in my life who were doubting me. In a way, that is quite natural. My family and friends are all supportive, but I don't come from a theater background. So when I discovered the story about this guy who had a dream and people doubted him, or he had obstacles in his way, I thought, that's such an inspirational story of someone who is going to overcome the odds and make his dream come true by whatever means necessary. It's a real underdog story that I really connected with, and at the time, because I thought this guy's just like me, there's something about it that really inspired me. And I thought, maybe this is something that other people will connect with. It feels like a universal story, the idea of having a dream. By writing about Larry's dream, Godfrey has gone some way to achieving his own and is now a rising star of musical theater. 42 Balloons. His first professional show has had notable backing. Producers Andy and Wendy Barnes also discovered hit show 6, while the Lowry gave early support to Operation Mincemeat, which has just won the Oliver Award for Best New Musical. Godfrey is also preparing for his second professional show called Babies, which will open at London's Other Palace Theatre at the end of May. Meanwhile, someone else has to have been inspired by Lawn Chair Larry in Mark Berry. By Lawn Chair Larry is Mark Berry, who started investigating the story and eventually came to act as his family's spokesman. He set out to correct some of his misconceptions about Larry. I really felt like people thought he was some kind of lunatic, and I wanted to let people know that this was not Larry, he says. This guy was us. The only difference was he pursued his dream. He was a dreamer who fulfilled his dreams. Unlike most of us who just sit in our chair, he actually pursued it. Barry, a pilot and a simulator engineer from Arizona, tracked down the actual lawn chair, which Larry had given to a child from the neighborhood where he landed. The chair is now in the U.S. National Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Barry isn't involved in the musical, although the chair's rediscovery is part of the plot, as is Larry's death at the age of 44 in 1993, 11 years after his flight. At the time, his mother told U.S. media that he shot himself in the heart after hiking to his favorite spot in the Angeles National Forest. It was highly accepted to have been a suicide. That's the storyline in the show. New evidence. However, his mother later told The New Yorker there were suspicious circumstances. There were drug smugglers in the area, and Larry was found with the gun in his right hand, whereas he was left-handed, she said. In the same article, Larry's sister dismissed the suggestion of foul play. Barry now claims to have uncovered evidence that Larry's death was not suicide, but doesn't want to give further details until he's finished writing the book about Larry's life and death. So part of Larry's story may still be left to told. Whatever the truth, he seemed destined to go down in history as a heroic maverick of everyday American life. Larry told the LA Times, I didn't think that by fulfilling my goal in life, my dream, that would create such a stir and make people laugh. 42 Balloons is at the Lowry in Salford until 19 May. Once praised, settlement to help sickened BP oil spill workers leaves most with nearly nothing. A cleanup worker picks up blobs of oil in observant snare at Queen's Best Island at the mouth of Barbateria Bay near the Gulf of Mexico. When a deadly explosion destroyed BP's Deepwater Horizon drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico, 134 million gallons of crude erupted into the sea over the next 3 months, and tens of thousands of ordinary people were hired to help clean up environmental devastation from the biggest offshore oil spill in U.S. history. These workers were expected to crude oil and the chemical dispersant Corexit while picking up tar balls along the shoreline, laying booms from the fishing boats to soak up slicks and rescuing oil-covered birds. Recognizing that some members of cleanup crews had likely become sick, BP agreed to a medical claims settlement 2 years after the 2010 disaster. Experts held it as an extraordinary achievement that would compensate workers fairly with little hassle. But it hasn't turned out that way. The effort has fallen far short of expectations, leaving many workers who claimed lasting health effects stranded with little or no payment. Through the settlement, BP has paid the ill workers and coastal residents a tiny fraction, $67 million, of the billions the company has spent on restitution for economic and environmental damage. The vast majority, 79%, received no more than $1,300 each. Many workers claiming illnesses from the spill were forced to sue, and they fared worse. All but a handy of roughly 4,800 lawsuits seeking compensation for health problems have been dismissed. Attorneys familiar with the case say they are unaware of any that have gone to trial, and know of only one that's been settled. Former boat captain John Moss received $110,000 from BP for his lung ailments in 2022, according to a confidential copy of the settlement. The repeated failures demonstrate how extremely difficult it is to prove to a court that a specific illness is caused by chemical exposure, even when those chemicals are recognized causes of illness more generally. An Associated Press investigation that included dozens of interviews with cleanup workers, attorneys, and experts, and a review of voluminous court filings revealed a single switched word in the settlement prevented thousands of workers from receiving anything over the minimum of $1,300 each. To get more, they had to file individual lawsuits, an option that almost always led to defeat. Most federal judges hearing those cases required a lot of proof connecting chemical exposure to workers' illnesses, and the lead government epidemiologist studying the spills says it's likely impossible to meet. Big law firms representing dozens or even thousands of workers failed their clients in various ways. After BP accused one firm of manufacturing medical claims, its cases were dismissed in big batches. Robin Greenwald, one of the plaintiff's attorneys who negotiated the settlement, said even her firm has not been able to win a single medical case against BP. I wanted people to get their day in court and they win or lose a trial, said Greenwald, a former federal environmental prosecutor. Let a jury decide. But they weren't even given the chance to do that. BP declined to comment for this story, citing ongoing litigation 14 years after the spill. Getting sick. After the explosion on April 20th, 2010, the spill was spectacular. A camera live streamed the rupture on cable news, showing the world in real time gushing oil that wouldn't stop. Oil floated on the Gulf and washed ashore, covering plants, birds, and other animals. To break up oil, roughly 1.8 million gallons of Chronicle were dropped from planes and sprayed from boats, far more than previous U.S. oil spills. The manufacturer said it was safer than dish soap. But lab research on human tissue and animals has revealed Chronicle can damage cells that protect the airways and cause scarring that narrows breathing tubes, according to Dr. Vina Antony, a University of Alabama professor of pulmonary and critical care medicine, who has studied Chronicle's effect on lung tissue. Over time, she said, the process can make it harder and harder to breathe. I genuinely believe that there was harm done, and we didn't realize the harm was being done. And now people are suffering, said Antony, who testified as an expert witness in one suit against BP. I would not, at the present time, put my hand even in Cortex without wearing double gloves. Workers head to the beach to clean up oil residue in Grand Isle, May 30th, 2010. Workers use absorbent pads to remove oil that has washed ashore from the Deepwater Horizon spill, June 6, 2010. The current producer at Chronicle, Champion X, said the dispersant was pre-approved by the government for use on oil spills, and the manufacturer had no role in deciding when or how to spray it. Oil itself has long been known to cause illness. One of its toxic components is benzene, which can cause conditions ranging from skin irritation to cancer. But now researchers, including Dale Sandler at the National Institute of Health, are finding that spill workers exposed to amounts of oil assumed safe have suffered from dizziness, nausea, lung problems, and heart attacks. The exposures on average were still pretty low, said Sandler, an epidemiologist leading the Gulf study, a major effort to quantify workers' exposure and track health woes over years. What surprised us is that we did see a wide range of health effects that were associated with those exposures. Sandler said the study is the largest ever of an oil spill and is ongoing. We're looking at long-term risks like diabetes, cancer incidents, she said. What researchers have found so far is echoed by other studies, including one involving about 3,500 Coast Guard responders. The responders who reported breathing oil fumes were 40% to 50% more likely to have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, like symptoms, and sinus problems compared to those who said they didn't breathe fumes. And responders who reported the exposure to both oil and Chronicle were more than twice as likely to suffer shortness of breath.
Already, this oil spill is the worst environmental disaster America has ever faced.
We cannot rest, and we will not rest, until BP permanently seals the wellhead and until they clean up every drop of oil.
We've got essentially an Army, a Navy, and an Air Force mobilized here. We've got 25,000 people working on this spill today.
all this stuff. I got all these cases. You know, a lot of people will talk smack about their cases or whatever it is, you know, and we were directly affected by the chemicals. We were directly sprayed by the chemicals. When we leaned over the bow of our boat and picked up oil-filled pom-poms and absorbent pads and filled them into bags, we were saturated with oil from one end to the other. My boat was saturated with oil from one end to the other. We were told by BP that it was as safe as Dawn dish soap. I'm supposed to have 8 pages now. I have asthma attacks doing basic, minor, small things now. I'm not sure where I'm at. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I am sure I haven't seen the end of it.
It feels like you have a real heavy chest at times. Breathing gets difficult. It's kind of like you have a cold all the time. And I was told that the case was closed and they didn't see where there was any liability at all as far as I was concerned.
You still have to be able to show that it was more likely than not that exposure that you had as either a cleanup worker or a resident that lived on the coast, their disease was caused by their exposure to the BP chemicals. I mean, honestly, when you look at the stations they had where they monitored air, they were so far apart. They very rarely reported what came out of it. The government didn't make them do it. You know, I mean, there's just so many parties that are responsible for letting these defendants wreak havoc on our society, on the environment, on people who are exposed to it.
A promising settlement. Proving to a court that a specific person's illness was likely caused by the exposure to oil or Corexit can be difficult. Yet the settlement for medical claims was supposed to make it easier for workers. BP would agree exposure to the spill could cause a host of known health issues, and workers suffering from them could file claims for payment. Initially, attorneys advocating for the settlement said it could help as many as 200,000 possibly injured workers and residents. The settlement also included $105 million from BP for regional health outreach and free health checkups for exposed workers every 3 years for 21 years. But these things quickly went awry. The third-party administrator hired to handle claims, Garrettson Resolution Group, initially rejected 78% of roughly 37,000 claims. After many were resubmitted, around 36% were still rejected, and claimants received nothing. Greenwald was especially frustrated. Her clients' claims were repeatedly deemed deficient. We had many a meeting with Garrettson's team to try to shake them, lose some of their narrow readings and obsession with deficiencies. She said, "We clearly knew the claim form. We negotiated it." Matthew Garrettson, founder of Garrettson Resolution Group, defended his claims, handling in an email saying, "It was the process the parties agreed upon, and we had to administer the settlement exactly in the way the parties' settlement agreement mandated." The company was paid roughly $115 million to $120 million for administrating claims that the outreach program and medical checkup effort as of 2018, he said. There was a bigger problem. A brown pelican is covered in oil on the beach in the aftermath of the oil spill. A worker shovels oil from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. At the most basic level, workers could submit affidavits attesting to their medical problems and collect $1,300, and residents could collect $900. About 18,000 received that much. Those with longer-term illnesses who had proof for medical tests could collect up to $60,700, or more if they had been hospitalized. But few people had that proof. 40 of about 23,000 with approved claims collected the maximum award, less than 0.2%. Many people lacked health insurance or easy access to a doctor and then required medical tests. A problem U.S. District Court Judge Carl Barbier, who approved the settlement, acknowledged in a hearing. Speaking for South Louisiana, I know, you're dealing with people who are probably at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. Most of these people, I feel sure, likely have no health insurance, he said. Even when people did seek medical attention, doctors untrained in treating chemical exposures often did not link illnesses to a patient's cleanup work in medical records, according to Greenwald. The nation's clients. The nation's law firm based in Houston represented thousands of workers like Paul Loop, who helped clean oil contaminated beach in Pascagoula, Mississippi for several months. Loop, 68, says he now has chronic respiratory issues, making it hard to stand or speak at length. He quit his job as a procurement manager because it involved too much travel. The firm had wanted to help clients collect more than the settlement's $1,300 minimum, so it developed a plan to obtain needed medical proof. It was an assembly line. Out-of-state nurse practitioners who were paid $20 per plaintiff entered medical histories based on information the law firm, not a doctor, provided. Firm-designed forms listed illnesses that paid more under the settlement, and doctors could simply circle them. The forms included a statement linked to patient's illness to oil spill work, with a line for the doctor to sign. Doctors didn't keep their own patient records. While such a process might seem suspect, firm founder Howard Nations said in an interview that he met with the claims administrator, Gerritsen, to try to develop an acceptable one. Gerritsen rejected the claims, not based on the process, but on the deadline. The deadline and a switched word. The settlement was designed to make it easier to collect money for illnesses that surface quickly with the crude oil exposure. People with diseases that can show up years later, such as cancer, would be forced to file individual federal lawsuits. Early settlement drafts defined this second group as people with a disease that manifests. After April 16, 2012, however, a later draft changed the word manifests to diagnosed. In 2014, BP seized on that change to argue no one diagnosed after the deadline could receive an award for a long-term illness through the settlement. That meant two people could have the same illness, but the one who got their diagnosis before the deadline could file a claim for compensation, while the other would need to file a suit instead. Judge Barbier said that that's not how he led to believe the settlement he okayed would work. It is rather strange that the court would approve a settlement, a class settlement that really doesn't settle thousands of claims and requires them to file another lawsuit. Barbier said at a 2014 hearing, I mean, it doesn't sound like much of a settlement. BP attorneys said that any other interpretations would invite fraud, allowing opportunistic law firms to pay for medical diagnosis after the deadline to get a settlement claims payout. They also said the word change was requested by the workers' own attorneys, and Stephen Herman, co-lead counsel for plaintiffs' attorneys, testified they didn't recall how it happened. Despite his doubts, Barbier said he had to follow the settlement language. His ruling forced thousands of workers out of relatively easy administrative claims process into federal courts throughout the South. The federal lawsuits. The ruling was devastating for Nation's clients whose only option was to file federal lawsuits. After BP attorneys alleged in Mississippi federal court that the firm manufactured medical diagnosis, Nations agreed to dismiss the case by the dozens. In an interview, Nations did not deny BP's allegations, but said the cases were unwinnable without an adequate expert witness. Loop, the former beach cleanup worker, said he didn't know until informed by a reporter last year that his case had been dismissed years earlier. I call Nations every 6 months or so, and they've just said it's going to take some time, he said. Another Nations client was Jeff Ehring, the deckhand of Mass, the boat captain believed to be the only person whose case reached settlement. When their boat was sprayed with Corix, Herring started throwing up so badly an ambulance was calling to pick him up. Although released from the hospital after a few days, he developed chronic sinus and respiratory problems, according to his lawsuit. Months later, a doctor at an oil spill medical station referred him to a specialist, and he was hospitalized again, said Herring. Now 39, an x-ray found spots on his lungs, and he was supposed to go to New Orleans for further testing, but never did. That would have took another 2 weeks being hospitalized over there, he said. I couldn't because I had to get back to work. Noting he had no health insurance, Herring said he received about $8,000 through the claims process, not enough to even pay hospital bills. Herring's suit was thrown out in 2020, along with 235 other Nations cases, but he said he wasn't told. Howard Nation said the firm communicated with clients about the status of their cases. Although the individual suits were dismissed, he intended to go back to Judge Barbier with new arguments. Expert witness. Other law firms met a different obstacle. Workers filing individual lawsuits have to prove they were exposed to enough oil to disperse into, but more likely than not, cause their illness. The workers' experts relied on studies, such as those from the National Institutes of Health and the Coast Guard, that found people exposed to oil and core exit were more likely to develop certain illnesses. But BP's experts maintained workers needed to show exactly how much oil and dispersant they had inhaled or ingested, and that it was sufficient to cause their sickness. Greenwald, the attorney who helped craft the settlement, said, "Meeting such a standard is almost impossible. I mean, how deep did you breathe? Right at the moment you were standing there. Was the wind blowing?" she said. "What mortal human would be able to testify about that?" Most judges have sided with BP, rejecting workers' experts as unreliable and effectively ending the cases. Sandler, the NIH epidemiologist, said its researchers went to great lengths to develop data on exposure like nothing ever been done before. "I'm not sure that they'll ever meet the standards that the court is imposing on what constitutes evidence," she said. It also can be difficult to find an expert witness who knows the science, but doesn't have a conflict of interest through the work with the oil industry. The Falcon law firm brought on Gerald Cook, a retired Navy physician trained in occupational and environmental medicine. As an expert on numerous cases, he was rejected again and again by judges as BP poked holes in his professional history and work. "Your report doesn't balance the evidence favoring your conclusions with the evidence that disfavors your conclusions. Isn't that fair?" a BP attorney asked Cook in a disposition. "Yeah, I think that's fair," Cook replied. He declined comment, and Falcon did not reply to requests for comment. Some law firms that took on hundreds of cases have simply buckled under the strain, begging judges for more time so their overloaded experts could produce reports. Looking forward, it's not completely over. The Downs Law Group, which has lost hundreds of cases against BP, is appealing in the 5th and the 11th U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals, hoping they'll rule federal district judges have misconstrued the level of proof needed for toxic exposure cases. One of those judges said the issue is very ripe for the Supreme Court to resolve. "It has a broader reach than the BP oil spill," said Jason Clark, a Downs attorney. "If the burden is one that's too high for any plaintiff to meet, then a lot of people who are exposed are never going to see justice." Meanwhile, Downs is talking to thousands of people interested in suing over illnesses such as cancer that emerged years after the spill, Clark said. Sandler, the NIH epidemiologist, said the high burden of proof demanded by most judges means people can't win. "I think at the end of the day, did the oil from the oil spill make people sick?" "Yes," Sandler said. "Now, courts may view this from a very different lens, but from a public health standpoint, yes, the oil spill made people sick." A crew member looks at the oil slick in the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig collapse. Thursday, May 6, 2010.